What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Today we're going to be looking at some of the most impressive and overlooked cards that the game of Yu-Gi-Oh has ever seen. Some of these cards are even so good that you could argue that they're straight up broken. If the cards are so good, why are they overlooked, you might ask? Well, it's mainly due to being stuck in, for lack of a better term, a terrible archetype. Much like a sports superstar who's on the last place team, these cards are the epitome of greatness, but sadly in some circumstances they're surrounded by mediocrity. Now, I don't want to piss off any of the fans of these archetypes, so I'm not necessarily saying that the archetypes themselves are worthless. It's just that historically they have seen little to no competitive success. I decided to stick to cards that only work in the context of their own archetype, so while something like Heartbeat's Feather Duster is undeniably broken, it can be used in like 90% of Yu-Gi-Oh decks easily, especially considering it's a standalone card. And remember, if you don't see a card that you immediately thought of, keep in mind that this takes into consideration how good these Yu-Gi-Oh archetypes were throughout history, not just currently. This means that while Blackwing suck now, and you may have thought of Blackwing Gofu for the list, during the 5Ds era, they were a powerhouse and would never qualify as a terrible archetype. Lastly, I'll be doing the ranking based on how good the individual card is, not the archetype. Without further ado, welcome to the top 10 absolutely broken Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are stuck in terrible archetypes. The Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Predaplant Chimera Rafflesia, Archetype Predaplants. A lot of people probably would have expected Ortho Scorpio if I told them that there was going to be a Predaplant card on the list, but I went with by far the deck's best boss monster. Scorpio may have more combo potential, but it also requires a lot of other cards and a discard from the hand to truly shine. Chimera Rafflesia, on the other hand, is a walking tank capable of taking down 4,000 attack monsters. Add that to its awesome spot removal banish effect, and you have a very capable killer plant that can easily kill two birds with one stone. Best of all, Rafflesia isn't just an offensive powerhouse. When it goes to the graveyard, it also floats and grants you a Search of Polymerization or any spell card with fusion in its name. This actually opens up the door for some of those Scorpio combos, as Instant Fusion, Brilliant Fusion, and Refusion can all lead to some pretty nutty plays. Number 9, Lunalight Black Sheep, Archetype Lunalight. Her name may be Black Sheep, but she's certainly not the odd one out and one of my favorite archetypes of all time. There are more powerful cards in Lunalight, like Leo Dancer, and there are others that raise the deck's potential exponentially, like Kaleido Chick, but make no mistake here, Black Sheep is the most important card in the deck. Not only does she instantly search Polymerization or Fusion Substitute, cards that let you start fusion summoning your boss monsters, but she has a built-in Warrior Returning Alive effect as well. This means that if you already have the fusion spell, she can replace herself with any other card that you might need at the time from your graveyard or have face up in your extra deck. And if neither one of those effects are actually needed, then you can just sit back and take advantage of her excellent floating effect that essentially makes her a free fusion material, which helps you manage your resources quite well. In the context of Lunalight, it might not sound all that impressive, but she's essentially a deck thinning, resource managing floater who turns herself into any monster in the archetype that you've already used, who also lets you go into your boss monsters. Sounds pretty good now, doesn't it? Number 8, Psyframe Overload, Archetype Psyframes. Psyframes aren't terrible per se, but you definitely can't argue them having a lot of competitive success. A lot of that derives from their complete and utter reliance on their field spell, Psyframe Circuit, and while Psyframes do have some other powerhouse meta-impacting cards like Omega and Gamma, at this point, those cards are basically associated with decks like Zombies, Lightsworn, and Spiral more than they are their own archetype. Overload, on the other hand, works exclusively in the deck and does so fantastically. Not only does it turn every monster in the archetype into potential fodder for removal every single turn, but it gives you the option of using resources in your hand and on your field. Even better than that, Overload uses one of Yu-Gi-Oh's best forms of removal, banishing face down. This makes these cards almost impossible to recover and means that they can no longer be targeted as well. The cherry on top is the fact that the card also acts as a free rota for the entire archetype from the graveyard, so you get a search that's incredibly hard to stop as well. Number 7, Subterror Fiendess, Archetype Subterror. In a game where hand traps are becoming more prevalent and integral parts of the competitive meta with each passing era, getting your own theme hand trap can kind of be like a dream come true. Some archetypes like Ghost Tricks and Psyframe need them just to survive, and they're mainly defensive cards. Subterror Fiendess, however, is on a completely different level. This chick is essentially Infernity Barrier, but she works from the hand or field. She does require you to control a Subterror monster, however, it's not that big of a drawback as she flips the monster face down, and Subterrors are primarily flip effect based. This negation style effect would have already made her an incredibly strong defensive or offensive card in my book, but even when she's not negating cards, Phoenix is still a huge playmaker. Her second effect gives you Monster Reborn for the archetype at the cost of just flipping one of your monsters face down, which again can actually be a positive in a flip-based deck. It's also worth pointing out that if you don't have any flip monsters on the field at the time, she can simply flip herself face down and you get a free +1. Number 6, Amazoness Call, archetype Amazoness. I was generally shocked Amazons had a card this amazing. Most people just know them as pretty much a failed archetype played by My Valentine in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! DM anime, but with their revival in Arc V, piloted by the Tyler sisters, they got this absolute gem of a card. We've already established that a Rhoda for your entire archetype, spell trap, or monster is pretty damn good in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Well, a Foolish Burial-like effect isn't too shabby either. Anyone who plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Can tell you that a lot of cards actually trigger when they hit the graveyard or just work well inside the grave. What could possibly be better than a Foolish Burial or a Rhoda, you might wonder? It's when you get both effects in one card. Amazoness Call is basically the ultimate play starter, and it gives you two of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s best utility effects in one package. In addition to this, it also randomly has a crazy OTK potential effect, as if you banish it from the graveyard, one of your Amazoness monsters is allowed to attack every monster your opponent controls. A play starting card that also gives you the potential to end the game. What more could you want? Number 5, SPEEDROID TERRORTOP, archetype SPEEDROIDs. I don't think that I really have to prove my case here. The ban list already made it abundantly clear just how strong this one card rank 3 is. While Zodiac, among other things, may have actually gotten TERRORTOP limited, never forget that this is part of the SPEEDROID family. On the surface, it really looks like just another Stratos type searcher for its respected archetype, which it basically is, but what separates it from Stratos, Deneb, Machina Gear Frame, and a dozen other monsters like it is the fact that TERRORTOP can be special summoned inherently from the hand and still get that search effect. This may seem like a small detail, but its playmaking ability dwarfs similar cards by comparison because you get the option of using the cards that you searched immediately. Number 4, DINOMISTS HOWLING, archetype DINOMISTS. One card pendulum scales are definitely a taboo in Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially in the TCG. Look at how a lot of them found their way to the Forbidden and Limited list, like Performapal Monkey Board, Cleaford Scout, and maybe even Supreme King Darkworm soon enough. Surprisingly, DINOMISTS are actually one of the archetypes that can say they have one of these powerful cards. It's not a monster like a lot of the cards that I mentioned, and it is a fair bit slower being a trap, but it is a card that makes up for it by being useful against the #1 hard counter against the entire pendulum mechanic and anti-spell fragrance. DINOMISTS HOWLING gives you a full complete pendulum scale and does it without even actually activating the pendulum cards, rather it places them in the zones. It does prohibit you from pendulum summoning for a turn, which would generally make you think that the card could feel worthless at times, but it does turn all your DINOMISTS monsters into walking evac devices at the cost of tributing themselves, an effect that can be useful at any point of the game. What you have in Howling is one of the best utility pendulum support cards in the game, the one downside with a ton of upside. Number 3, Toon Table of Contents, archetype Toons. At this point, you're probably sick of me telling you how good Rhodas are in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it's a simple concept to understand. Being able to search any monster you want in an archetype gives you flexibility to take your play in any direction that archetype and your resources allow you to. It's pretty seldom that you get a card that not only lets you search the monsters in the archetype, but in Toon Table of Contents case, actually lets you search every spell and trap as well. This, for obvious reasons, makes the card much more valuable, but the holy grail of searching is what you get here when a card searches every card in the archetype and is not a hard once per turn. This leaves you with the opportunity to perfectly craft your hand into whatever the hell you want if you're lucky enough to open with multiple copies of the card. If Toon Table of Contents wasn't stuck searching tunes, it might be the best search card in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Number 2, W. Nubella Meteorite, archetype Worms. Worms actually had a lot of competitive potential, and they actually got a couple of regional top 8s, but a lot of small problems like too many abysmal high-level monsters and being released in the 5Ds era as the main antagonist of the first DT storyline, an FYI there, all kind of cultivated into one big problem. Worms are flip-based, sorta, and because a lot of the best monsters in the archetype are level 4 and light, they really should have been Exceed-based, but they were randomly fusion based. That doesn't sound right. Thanks, Konami. Making Worm Zero really helped the archetype. Not really. Problems aside, the good cards in Worms like Worm King, Yex, and Yagen were all solid pieces of the archetype. None of these cards, however, were even remotely close to being as good as their best card. W. Nuella Meteorite isn't a card Worms just want to see and resolve in duels. It's practically the deck's best win condition. First off, it lets you instantly trigger your flip monster effects like Yagen and Kartaros, and possibly during your opponent's turn at that. Second, it lets you potentially reuse these same flip monster effects as they are flipped back face down during the end phase. Third, you actually get to draw cards equal to the amount of monsters that were put face down during the end phase. Drawing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is always a good thing. And finally, my favorite part of this card's effect, it summons the archetype's best boss monster straight from the deck, ignoring summoning conditions. Who the hell wouldn't want to do that? Honorable mentions include Goki Rematch, Obliterate, and Kwakimu Urnite. Finally, to our number one, BEF Zelos, Archetype BES. From the very beginning in the GX era, I was never really a big fan of the BES archetype. A bunch of high-level tribute monsters that couldn't be destroyed in battle, but at the cost of blowing themselves up after a few turns or so. They were like much shittier versions of Monarchs, who lacked the mediocre protection that the BES monsters had, but their effects gave them immediate removal, and that's why Monarchs were competitive and BES weren't very strong. However, there is one thing Konami got right with BES, and that's their field spell. It instantly searches Boss Rush upon activation, which is a nice +1. Boss Rush gives the deck more ways to get monsters on the field. Zelos also makes those underpowered BES monsters feel significantly stronger, as they all gain a nice 500 attack and defense boost while on the field as well. This paired with the additional immunity to opponents' targeting and destruction effects, basically making them all Magic Specters who can't be destroyed in battle, actually makes these BES monsters feel pretty damn unkillable and completely overbearing. But to top it all off, Zelos actually lets you special summon a BES monster from your hand every single turn and gives the monster a counter as well. This pretty much erases the problems of them all being high levels and even delays the part where, you know, the BES monsters tend to blow themselves up. This card literally gets everything right and nothing wrong. It's such a fantastic card. It's a shame that the BES archetype is just so inherently bad. So let me know what you guys think. Are there any other amazing and borderline broken Yu-Gi-Oh cards that just happen to only work with crappy archetypes that I missed out on? If so, leave it in the comment section below. Once again, thank you to my Twitch stream for helping me out in making this list. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.